Thank you for joining me, everyone. For those who do not know me yet, my name is Ron Levine from Mindfulness in Blue Jeans. I've been practicing mindfulness and insight meditation for almost 25 years, and I was introduced to this practice during a time when I was dealing with clinical anxiety and depression and a panic disorder, which had blown up into agoraphobia, which I know some folks here know a lot about. So I was unable to work. I was on disability, unable to leave my house, couldn't go past my front door without having a meltdown of panic, and happened to get paired up with a psychologist who, even back in 1998, was several decades deep into practicing and teaching mindfulness and insight meditation. And that was the beginning of my journey. Now I am honored to be able to teach, bring these tools and techniques to other people, and give back to a practice that has given me so much. And this is why I'm here. And thank you for being with me. This is the next in our ongoing series of calming anxiety by living mindfully. And I don't really have much of a preamble for today's practice. I think we'll just jump right in. Okay? I always like to begin my sitting by imagining I am suspended from the ceiling by a piece of string attached to the top of my head as a nice cue to sit up straight without adding any extra tension to do so. And if we are experiencing some tension right now, that's absolutely fine. We can allow tension to simply be tension. I find where I run into trouble is when I try to force tension away, because that's just adding tension to the tension that's already there, which I found to be a really poor way of trying to relax, right? By adding more tension. So if there is some tension here, we can allow it to simply be tension. We can allow it to leave in its own time. And that may or may not be today. I also like to notice what is supporting me. The ground, a cushion, a chair. There's something holding me up. I can allow it to do so. Let's take a moment to notice what is supporting us from beneath. And this gentle suspension from the ceiling. And whatever else happens to be in between the two for us right now, however it is. And if you haven't already, you may begin to bring your attention to your breathing. And you may notice that simply by bringing attention to the breathing, it begins to change. We often start to try to exert some control over the breathing, start to shape the breathing. Sometimes simply because it's very difficult to consciously notice the breathing without doing so. Sometimes because we think we need to make the breathing be a certain way for our meditation practice. Well, our breathing does not need to be a certain way for our meditation practice. Our meditation practice is about noticing the breathing as it is. It's less about the quality of the breathing, long or short, deep or shallow. Not that they don't matter, but it's less about that, and more about simply noticing which of those qualities it happens to be, moment to moment. And one of the things we may notice when we try to observe the breathing without trying to control or shape it is it's very difficult. We may notice there's some controlling going on, some shaping happening. We're not really sure how to stop it. We've been doing it for so long. And if that's the case, we can simply notice the controlling or the shaping. The same way we don't bring tension to get rid of tension, we don't need to try to control our controlling or shape our shaping. It can be enough to simply notice that it's here. I've found that just shining that light of attention on it, all by itself, is enough to allow it to change on its own, in its own time. Just like that tension that can leave in its own time. Now, as most of us who have spent any amount of time trying to stay focused on the breathing can attest, it's very difficult to stay focused exclusively on the breathing for very long. So sometimes one of the cues that we'll receive is to think as we're breathing in, I breathe in. As we breathe out, I breathe out. Or, more generally, I'm breathing. But here's the thing. The body knows how to breathe by itself, right? So is there really an I necessary here? I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I mean, clearly not, considering how difficult it is to stay focused on the breathing. So even when we're not focused on the breathing, it's still happening, right? So the body can take care of this just fine. So does it have to be I breathe in, I breathe out, I'm breathing? Do I have to do anything? No. I just like to notice breathing is happening. There's simply a process that is happening. I don't really have to do anything. There's a process of breathing. There's a process of noticing the breathing. There might even be a process of noticing the noticing of the breathing. The breathing isn't us. The noticing isn't even us. If it was, we could directly control our ability to always be noticing. But can we? Not in my experience. It comes, it goes. I catch it, I lose it. See, even right there, I'm saying I catch it and I lose it, right? That's how deeply ingrained this is. But am I catching it and am I losing it? Well, not really. I mean, I don't have a choice, right? It's just happening. We don't get to choose when we lose the breathing, when we notice the breathing again after having lost it. These things aren't us. They're just processes. Breathing is happening. breathing is happening. We may notice short breathing is happening. Long breathing is happening. Deep breathing is happening. Shallow breathing is happening. Mine, by the way, tends to be shallow. Most of the time. It's perfectly all right. So as we notice these processes as the processes that they are, when we notice these processes as the processes that they are, we're gaining a little bit of space. Starting to loosen some of that identification that we have with these processes, thinking of them as who we are. And if we can do that with something as simple but as critical as breathing, well, we can do that with a lot of other things as well. For example, I'm anxious. I am anxious. Is that what we are? Is that all we are? I mean, there's a lot of other things going on at any given moment. Heart beating, neurons firing, blood flowing, breathing. And yet we limit ourselves to this one thing. I am anxious. Now we've defined ourselves as this one thing. Is that accurate? Again, not in my experience. So perhaps I'm feeling anxiety. Well, that opens things up a little bit. That acknowledges that this is a feeling, a process. And there's room for other ones to be happening. It's not this monolithic thing that is us, right? But even then, we're still identifying. I feel anxiety. What about like with the breathing? There is breathing. There is anxiety. I'm not saying it's not there. It's here. We're taking the I out of it. It's not us. It's a process. It's an experience. Not necessarily a pleasant experience. Not denying that. But it's an experience that is here. There is breathing. There is anxiety. There's room for both. Room for more. Room for them to process. That's what processes do. Like that process of tension I mentioned at the beginning. We allow it to process. We can even take it a step further. Because even anxiety in itself is a label, a perception, a concept. That comprises a bunch of smaller processes. Physical processes. Emotional processes. Mental processes. Maybe a quickened heart rate, fluttering stomach, an obsessive thought. A negative feeling. So rather than there is anxiety, there are sensations and a label of anxiety. There is a quickened heart rate. There is a fluttering stomach. There is a negative feeling. There is a recurring thought. There is the noticing of each of these things. There is the breathing. And again, we're not denying that any of them are here. We're not trying to say that any of them are any more or less pleasant or unpleasant than they are. This is not a fancy form of denial. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We're taking the components apart so that we can see each of them more clearly. And in the process, we ease some of that identification. That we have formed around them based on really our desires and fears about them. And what are those desires and fears but more processes that aren't us? Because if they were us, Would we be desiring or fearing them? We'd have total control over them. Wouldn't be necessary. So clearly they're not us. There is breathing. There is breathing. As you go through the rest of your day, you may notice what processes, internal and external, we so quickly identify with, so quickly take ownership of. And see, is that helpful? Or not so much? Very often we'll hear that these practices of mindfulness, insight meditation, are for finding out who we really are. But that hasn't been my experience. For me, it's become much more about finding out what I'm really not. Thank you, everyone. I'll hang on for a couple of moments if anyone would like to share or ask anything in the chat. Yeah, Farn, as anxiety is disturbing, we're not aware of destabilizing. There we go. Okay. Destabilization is a process in itself, isn't it? If anything, one of the hallmarks of processes is instability. I mean, if something was perfectly stable, that's not really a process anymore, is it? a process necessarily implies that there is change. And in fact, this is one of the Buddha's central teachings, is on that of impermanence. How we live in what he called a conditioned existence, meaning there are causes and conditions leading to effects, and those effects become causes and conditions for more effects, and so forth. There's an inherent instability in this world that we live in. It's all based on causes and effects. And one of the problems we run into is we don't perceive that accurately. I'm sitting on a chair with a cushion on it right now. It feels very solid, and in fact, it's solid enough to hold me up. But it's not as static as it looks. If you look under a strong enough microscope, you're going to see it's really zillions of atoms moving around that are densely packed enough that it can have, to my eyes, which are not as strong as a microscope, the appearance of stability. Is it stable? No, it's not. It's actually not. But our sense organs are not sharp enough to be able to perceive that. We don't see reality as it is. There's instability everywhere, but we don't see so much of it. But we expect it. And boy, do we run into trouble because of that. So, is anxiety destabilizing? Sure, absolutely. So's basically everything else. What is stable? I mean, what is really stable? This is one of the reasons we engage in a practice like this, is our concentration is unstable. Our attention is unstable. But we can work on those to make them more stable, more consistent, so that we can see a little more clearly. If not with our physical eyes, then perhaps with our wisdom, our felt sense. A large part of this process is simply, or I should say a large part of this practice, which is a process in itself, right, is about seeing the instability that is here. Anxiety may be destabilizing, but anxiety itself is also unstable. Anxiety isn't any more stable than anything else. Anxiety is a process. The destabilization is unstable. Okay? Anxiety and its destabilization themselves are processes that are not stable. It's like the old saying that the only thing that's consistent is inconsistency. So even instability is subject to instability. From Lisa, the word am is very powerful and should only be used for positive things. Maybe. I personally would say it should be used for what we actually are. So it's not a matter of whether it's something negative or something positive. We use it accurately. I mean, to say we'd only use it for positive things is a nice optimistic view. I consider myself more a realist than an optimist. I'm just trying to see things as clearly as I can. So I wouldn't even use am for positive things myself. I would try to, and here, even here I'm saying I, right? Okay, you can't get away from it really, right? I would try to use am for that which I actually am. And I haven't found what that is yet. I've certainly found a lot of things that I am not. That list seems to keep growing. The list of what I'm not keeps getting longer. And as that gets longer, I find it harder to put anything on the list of what I am. So that's my take on that. Patricia, I'm glad that helped the noticing of the anxiety the same way we notice the breathing. Yeah, they're both processes. And there's also a process of how those two processes interact, right? As I was mentioning a moment ago, everything is based on causes and conditions which lead to effects, which then become causes and conditions for more effects. These aren't isolated processes. These aren't isolated causes and conditions. They intermingle in so many different ways, that some of which we're aware of, some of which we're not aware of. And this in itself is one of the reasons, one of the causes for the instability that I was talking about, for the impermanence, for the inconstancy. If there are all these different causes and conditions playing off of each other all the time, creating effects which become more causes and conditions, playing off of each other. And this has all been happening since day one, right? Whether we're talking about day one of the universe or day one of our lives or however you want to take it. If this has all been going on for so long, how could we possibly expect stability, permanence, constancy, right? So it's about noticing the processes, noticing how they interact, noticing how we react and respond to the effects of these causes and conditions, and how those reactions and responses become causes for more effects. We're talking about karma here. This is what the Buddha talked about when he talked about karma. The causes and effects. Not some day off in the future, not some, I like to say, we have this bastardized view of karma in the West where it's all about justice and revenge and what goes around comes around and he's going to get his in the end. And that's not what the Buddha taught. Karma is about cause and effect. And it's here and now. Because based on how we are working with what's here now, we create our experience in this moment and the next. Karma is now. It's just that basic. Yeah, seeds, great question. If one is no longer anxious, what are you then? Yeah, great question. This is the rabbit hole we go down when we start talking about the self, right? What is my self? Is it my body? Well, okay, so if I lose a body part, am I still myself? If I start chopping pieces off, at which point am I no longer myself? So that's not really reliable. Am I my thoughts? All right, so who am I when I'm asleep? If I'm my thoughts, or I'm my memories, or who am I if I get amnesia? By definition, I can't be my thoughts because my thoughts are my thoughts. And even again, I'm owning them, right? I'm saying my thoughts. You see how insidious this is. But if I'm my thoughts, then who's paying attention to them? Who's listening to them? Who's analyzing them? So once we've pointed to something and said it's us, it already can't be because we've called it something else. I'm not these thoughts, they're thoughts. I'm not these feelings, they're feelings. I'm not anxiety, that's a label based on more thoughts and feelings, right? It's like looking at it under that microscope again and see that, oh wait, this chair is not the solid, stable thing I think it is. There's a lot of movement and instability here. Yeah, Ren is saying here, it's like learning the process to become an observer. One of the phrases I like to use sometimes when I'm thinking about the body being able to breathe on its own, sometimes I like to think I'm outsourcing the breathing. It's like, I don't have to do anything with this. I can outsource the breathing to the body. Which is the case anyway, but it's a nice way to frame it psychologically. Like, oh, okay, I can just watch how the body breathes. This is the body's responsibility. It's not on me. I don't have to do a damn thing. I'm going to outsource this to the body and see how it handles it. Like, oh, look at this. And it's kind of a relief. It's nice. It's like, oh, I don't have to do anything. I can just see what it's doing. Interesting. And we begin to relinquish some of that control that it turns out we didn't need in the first place. And in fact, we didn't even ever really have. And that frees up a lot of energy. And a lot of that identification, that ownership, starts to fall away. And when we feel what that's like, we almost have to laugh a little bit and say, why the hell was I hanging on so hard all this time? Yeah, Farnaz, I know who I am. I'm the same person I've always known, but with a bit of sadness and need to belong. And those are processes themselves. As is the process of knowing. And that process in itself may change. Again, it's a process. It's inherently unstable, even if we don't necessarily see that. I'll wrap it up there. Folks, have a great rest of the day. Thank you for being with me. And I hope to see you all again real soon. Cheers, everybody. Take care.